I was born in 1932, which was the middle of the Depression, or close to the beginning of the Depression. But when I was born, I didn't feel the Depression that much. I got all of the diapers I needed, so I was in good shape. Then after the war, I finished high school and went to college. The success of humor in our house inspired me to be funny if I could. I wanted to be a comedian before I became a writer, inspired by Jerry Lewis. Jerry Lewis was funny and hysterically funny, and so was a comic named Frankie Fontaine. And I just loved the idea of those kind of laughs they got and being funny. I wanted to be Jerry without having to fall down that much, because Jerry was a pratfaller, and as a result he hurt himself a lot of times. Then I would watch television, and Milton Berle would get laughs, and then the comedians that came on that show, and the Sullivan Show, they would all tell a joke and get laughs, and then that inspired me to write a joke or two. Luckily, I got a job within a week of getting out of the Army. I had a friend I met at college, and he wanted to be a comedian too, so we made ourselves a comedy team and got a job in the Catskill Mountains, New York, where we were social directors and comedians, and terrible. But one day a comedy team came up named Allen and DeWood, and they were there, and they were professionals, and they were very good, and we told them we were trying to be comedians, and they asked if we had any material that we'd like to sell them. So we said, all of it. You can have the whole act, and Lenny, take him. But they said, we're doing a routine about interviewing the Russian delegate to the United Nations. Do you have anything like that? We said, of course, we do that. And we ran down to our room and wrote a routine in 15 minutes, brought it up and sold it to them. And that was the beginning of writing. We realized we were better writers than we were performers. And that's how I became a professional writer, I guess. I wasn't officially professional because they didn't pay me yet. There was a show called The Shari Lewis Show. So I called her and I said, I'm looking for a job as a writer. She said, I don't need a writer. But if you want, come in, you'll talk to my writer. He'll tell you how to get started. Which I did, and then I went home after that lunch and wrote a little sketch for Lamb Chop and Charlie Horse and Shari and sent it to her and said, thank you for the time, and it's nice to see you again, goodbye. She called up the next day and said, you're hired. She loved the sketch, and that job lasted 5 years. Shari was a ventriloquist, and she was about the best to this day I've ever seen. I mean, she could do her M's and her B's, and you never saw the slightest movement. But basically, the concept was not, you were not writing for ventriloquists, you were writing for those characters. Like Lamb Chop was the sweet little cute little one, Charlie was the wise guy, and Hush Puppy, the dog, was the dummy. And we had Wing Ding, who was a way out crow. And so they were fun characters to write for. The most important show in one respect was Candid Camera. It was not a lot of comedy writing, but I had finished 5 years of writing for Shari, and my agent had presented me to a bunch of shows that were on the air, and they all turned me down because they said he can only write for puppets. Not too smart of them, but that's what they said. So I could not get a show that was on. Luckily, the director of the Shari Lewis Show was friends with a guy named Bill Anderson, who was the associate producer of Candid Camera, and they hired me. And now suddenly, after being out of work for 3 months, which is the longest I've ever been out of work in 50 years, like I had a job for a third of the pay, but I had a job. Then from there, I got that job on That Was the Week That Was, which was a prime time variety show. As a matter of fact, I got that job. I had gone in for an interview and didn't get the job, and the show was going on the air that Friday night. And that Friday afternoon, in the newspapers and on the radio, was the story of the telephone workers union, who were on strike, thinking of signing up with the Teamsters Union. So I called them up and I said, here's a joke you can use tonight. Why would the Telephone Workers Union sign with the Teamsters Union? Because half a union is better than none at all. They told that joke, got a huge laugh, and they called me the next day and hired me to do the show. Carol Burnett was about to go on the air, and there was word that they were looking for a sketch for Carol and her sister called Carol and Sis, who turned out to be Vicki Lawrence. So I wrote that on what we call on spec, which you're not supposed to do, but you do. And I sent that to Arnie Rosen, who was the head writer and producer, and they loved it and they hired me, and that was the first real grown-up show that I got. And that led to the Marlo Thomas, That Girl, which starred Marlo Thomas, was her creation, really. The character was her career. Marlo wanted to do a show about a single girl, woman, in New York City, succeeding on her own, without parents and without a husband. And it was the time in our history, 1968, 60, I think the first year was 66, where it was the beginning of the women's revolution, so to speak. And Marlo was one of the forerunners in that movement with Gloria Steinem. And she, to the extent that after 5 years of the show, I said to her, Marlo, you can't just keep kissing your boyfriend goodnight at the front door. This is 1971 already. He either comes in or you go to him or he's not there. But the alternative is get engaged already. So we shot a show where she got engaged to Ted Bessel. We finished that show, and as the year came to an end, she announced she wasn't going to do the show anymore, because while what I said made sense, she didn't want to give the message that a young woman has to be married to be successful and have a good life. So I talked myself out of a job. And Sanford and Son was a big job, big show, 3 years. And then I think one of the most important shows in my career was What's Happening, because we owned that show. What's Happening was a good show and fun. That made my life, that made my career, and it all worked out very nicely, thank goodness. And I'd be afraid to give advice to them bringing out, because I don't know the best way to break in now. I think the best way always was what I did. If you come up with an idea, write it thoroughly. If somebody wants to do a Big Bang Theory, talk, see if you can find a performer on the show or somebody who's working on the show, get an idea of what they're looking for, and then write out your whole idea. It's very hard. The rule we always gave anybody is not to write, if you want to get a job on Sanford and Son, don't write a Sanford and Son. So write a different show than the one you're selling it to, is the advice I would give. And the kids are all terrific and everybody is healthy. That's what we care about. Oh yeah, they love to tell jokes. They call up once in a while with a joke. I forget, Jack, who is now 7, called last month. He made up a very good joke, which is fun. We do a lot of knock-knock jokes. I can't remember the jokes or I would have sold them by now.